Alright, this is Jahangir from MedPorium, and today we have part 4 of our genetics and cellular function unit, in which we will discuss the cell cycle. Alright, so now let's talk about the cell cycle. The cell cycle is just a series of events or phases in which a cell usually goes through. Alright, so this is a picture of what we might expect the cell cycle to look like. Now in this cell cycle we have two major phases. We have what is called interphase, and we have the mitotic phase. Now as you can see, this green circle or this green structure represents interphase and how a cell spends most of its time in interphase, rather than the mitotic phase, which is a smaller portion, smaller structure in which the cell spends the least time in. Alright, so now let's talk about the four major phases or stages in the cell cycle. So the first stage of the cell cycle is known as the first gap phase. Now in the first gap phase, the cell just grows, it gathers materials for DNA replication, and it learns from its youth. It grows as a cell. Now the second phase or stage in the cell cycle is known as the synthesis phase, and this is where DNA replication occurs. The third stage or phase in the cell cycle is known as the second gap phase, and this is where the cell checks for any errors and just prepares for mitosis. Now our fourth and final stage or phase in the cell cycle is known as our mitotic phase, or just M phase. An important thing to know is that in the M phase, mitosis occurs. Now another phase a cell can enter is known as the G0 or G none phase. Now a cell does not have to go through interphase or the meiotic phase or even the cell cycle. It can avoid the cell cycle and go to the G0 G none phase, which is the resting place for a cell. A cell does not grow or divide in this stage. Within the cell cycle we have different checkpoints. These checkpoints are here to check if the cell is growing properly, dividing properly, etc. So the first one we have is known as our G1 checkpoint, and our G1 checkpoint checks if the cell is normal enough for DNA replication. Now the second checkpoint we have is known as our G2 checkpoint, and in this checkpoint we check to see if the DNA has been replicated properly and if that DNA isn't damaged and is ready for mitosis or cellular division. Now our last and final checkpoint is known as the G3 checkpoint. Now our G3 checkpoint is during metaphase or in between metaphase, in which this checkpoint checks if the chromosomes are in line with our spindle fiber in mitosis. In the next video we will talk about mitosis. And unfortunately that concludes part 4 of our genetics and cellular function unit, in which we discussed the cell cycle. And as always, a Pomodoro day will make you a doctor someday. I'll see you next time.